The car turned off the narrow road and rolled into the yard. Gravel shifted under the tires. The sound carried into the dark and then fell away. The engine kept its low vibration for a few seconds after Jack stopped, as if it needed to catch up with the fact that they had arrived. When he turned the key, the silence came in fast, filling the space between the seats. Tu Tien did not move right away. Her hands stayed folded in her lap. Dirt still sat in the lines of her fingers, ground in so deeply that even her nails looked darker than they should. She stared ahead at the yard, at the fence line, at the patches of ground the headlights had just swept over. Jack's hand rested on the steering wheel. His knuckles were pale. He kept his gaze forward for a beat, then turned to her with care, as if turning too quickly could make her pull away. "Can you stand?" She swallowed. Her throat hurt from a kind of dryness that water had not fixed. She nodded once, small. Jack got out first. The night air pressed in, cool and damp. He walked around the front and opened her door without letting it swing wide. His body stayed close enough to block the wind, but he did not reach for her until she shifted and put one foot down. Her shoe met the ground. Her knee wavered. Jack's hand hovered at her elbow and then touched, light, asking permission without words. Tu Tien's shoulder tightened for a moment, then softened. She let him steady her as she stood. The yard felt uneven under her feet. She did not remember stepping out of the forest, not clearly, but her body remembered the ground giving way under her, the fear of falling again. She stood with her weight, careful, testing. Jack looked at her face, not directly at the bruises, but at the way her eyes kept flicking toward the darkness beyond the fence. "It's just the yard," he said, low. She gave a sound that might have been agreement. She kept her chin down. Jack reached into the back seat for her bag. It was lighter than it should have been. He held it in one hand and offered his other hand again, not gripping, just present. She took half a step, then another, moving toward the house, as if the distance was longer than it had ever been. At the front door, Jack used his key and turned the lock slowly. The door opened with a quiet scrape of wood. He stepped inside first and found the switch. The porch bulb came on, then the overhead light inside. The room became evenly lit, the corners no longer hiding. Tu Tien stood at the threshold. She did not cross until he moved aside and gave her space. The smell inside was familiar. Dry wood, clean cloth, a faint trace of rice from earlier in the day. Nothing sharp, nothing strange. Her chest still stayed tight. Jack set her bag down near the wall, then bent to take off his shoes and place them neatly side by side. He did the same with hers when she slipped them off, aligning them as if order could hold the room together. The simple act made his hands steady. "Sit," he said. She went to the chair at the table but did not sit immediately. She rested her fingers on the backrest and stood there, feeling the solid wood under her palm. When she finally sat, she sat on the edge, ready to stand again. Jack moved quietly around the room. He filled a small pot with water at the sink and set it on the burner. The flame caught with a soft click. He did not look at her as he waited, but he stayed within her view, a constant presence she could anchor to. When the water warmed, he poured it into a basin and carried it to the table. He set it down gently, then placed a bar of soap beside it and a clean cloth folded into a square. His hands returned to folding even after the cloth was already folded, pressing the edges as if he needed the corners to meet. "Wash your hands," he said. Tu Tien stared at the basin. The surface of the water barely trembled. She reached in slowly. The warmth surprised her. Her fingers sank beneath the surface. For a second, her shoulders lowered, then rose again, as if she had caught herself relaxing. She lathered her hands with soap. She scrubbed her palms, then the backs of her hands, then between her fingers. She kept going long after the foam thinned. She rubbed at the skin around her wrists until the water clouded with gray. Jack stood across from her, watching without staring. He did not tell her to stop. He did not say it was enough. He only turned the faucet on and off once to rinse the basin edge where the water had splashed. Tu Tien lifted her hands out of the water. They were red and raw. She pressed them into the cloth Jack had placed beside the basin and dried them too hard, as if pressure could erase what had happened. Jack's voice stayed even. "Are you dizzy?" She shook her head, then paused and corrected it with a smaller motion. "A little." "Your knee?" She looked down. There was a dark patch showing through the fabric where it had rubbed and stained. "It hurts when I stand." Jack went to the small cabinet and took out a tin of ointment and a roll of bandage. He brought them to the table and set them down without sliding them. He opened the tin, then waited. "May I look?" he asked. Tu Tien's eyes went to his hands, then to the bandage, then to the floor. She nodded once. Jack crouched beside her chair. He moved slowly, giving her time to pull away if she needed. He rolled the fabric of her pant leg up just enough to see the skin. The bruise spread across her shin in dull colors, and there were scrapes where the skin had broken. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the chair. Jack paused. His hand stayed still on the fabric, not touching her skin. The pause was not hesitation from fear of the injury. It was fear of her fear. Tu Tien shut her eyes for a beat. When she opened them, she kept them on the table, not on his face. "You don't have to," she said. Jack's voice came out lower. "You are home now." The words landed in the room and stayed there. Tu Tien's throat tightened again. She did not cry. She only breathed in and out once, more carefully than before. Jack took the cloth and dampened a corner with warm water from the basin. He wiped the scrapes with gentle strokes. He did not rush. He did not press. He applied ointment in a thin layer and wrapped the bandage around her shin with even tension. When he finished, he did not tie it tight. He tucked the end and smoothed it once. "Too tight?" he asked. She flexed her foot. "No." Jack stood and washed his hands at the sink. The running water sounded loud in the quiet room. He turned it off and dried his hands on a towel, folding the towel back into place with the same careful edge matching. "You should wash your face," he said. She touched her cheek. Her skin felt unfamiliar, as if it belonged to a body that had walked too far. "I will," she said, but she did not move. Jack did not press. He turned toward the cooking area. He opened the cupboard and took down a pot and a bowl. He worked in small motions that did not demand attention, rinsing rice, chopping a few greens, cracking an egg into a bowl and beating it with a fork. The sound of the fork against the bowl was soft and steady, a rhythm he did not let change. Tu Tien watched him from the table. The light above them made the room clear. There were no dark corners to imagine shapes in. Still, her gaze kept drifting to the window, where night pressed against the glass. Jack set the pot on the burner and covered it. He did not speak while the water heated. He looked once at her hands, still red from scrubbing, then looked away so she would not feel seen in that way. When the food was ready, he brought it to the table. Soft rice, a small dish of steamed egg, greens cooked until tender. He poured plain water into 2 glasses and set one within her reach. He placed the bowls carefully, aligning them with the edge of the table. He set the spoons parallel. He adjusted one bowl by a finger's width until the distance between them matched. The order was quiet, almost stubborn. Tu Tien picked up her spoon. Her fingers trembled slightly. She tried to steady them by gripping harder. "Eat," Jack said. She took a small bite. The warmth settled in her mouth and down her throat. Her stomach tightened at first, then eased as if it had been waiting for permission. Jack ate too, but slowly. He watched the pace of her spoon. When she stopped for too long, he spoke again, not about what happened, not about who did it, only about what her body needed. Does it hurt when you swallow? No. Do you feel sick? She shook her head. He nodded once, as if he was collecting simple facts he could use later. He kept his voice flat, calm. Outside, something moved in the trees. A brief rustle, then stillness. Tu Tien's spoon stopped midair. Her shoulders went rigid. Jack heard it too. He did not turn his head toward the sound. He kept looking at his bowl. It's the wind, he said. Tu Tien lowered her spoon. She did not answer, but she took another bite. The fork in Jack's hand tapped the edge of his bowl once. He stopped it with his thumb, silencing it, then continued eating with more care, as if sound itself might cut her. After a few minutes, her breathing changed. It was still shallow, but it no longer came in short bursts. Her face had more color. Jack waited until she had eaten enough to be steady. He did not ask questions at the door when she first came in. He did not ask while she scrubbed her hands until they were raw. He did not ask while he wrapped the bandage. He waited for this moment, when her body was less likely to break apart. He set his spoon down and folded his hands on the table. His fingers were still tense, but he kept them still. Tell me what you remember, he said. Tu Tien stared at her bowl. The steam was gone now, the surface of the rice dull. She swallowed again and felt the tightness return to her chest. I don't know where they took me, she said, voice thin. I was not awake. Jack did not react. He did not let his face change. Only his jaw tightened once, then eased. Then tell me the last thing you know clearly, he said. She pressed her fingertips against the table edge, grounding herself in the wood. The grove, she said. I left the grove. Jack nodded. He reached for her glass and pushed it closer, the smallest motion, a practical offering. Drink some water, he said. Then keep going. Tu Tien lifted the glass with both hands. The rim trembled against her lip. She took a sip, then set it down carefully so it would not clink. Jack did not speak again. He stayed in his chair. He stayed present. He made space for her words to come out, in whatever shape they could manage. The clock on the wall marked the seconds with a small, steady sound. Jack did not fill the quiet with questions. He waited, hands folded, shoulders held in place, as if he could hold himself still enough for her to feel safe. Tu Tien kept her eyes on the table. Her spoon lay across the bowl rim. She had eaten, but not much. The food sat heavy in her stomach, not from weight, but from the way her body stayed ready to flinch. I left the grove, she said again, as if repeating it could make the memory settle. Jack nodded once. What time was it? He asked. Tu Tien took a breath. Her fingers moved to the edge of the bowl. She traced the rim with her thumb. Late morning, she said. Not noon yet. What were you carrying? A crate. Not full. Enough to sell. The clock kept going. Jack's voice stayed low. Were you alone? Yes. She spoke like she was walking on uneven ground. Each sentence tested the next. I had the strap on my shoulder, she said. The road was dry. There were places with shade, but most of it was open. Jack did not look away. He did not lean in. He let his attention be steady, not heavy. Where did it happen? He asked. Tu Tien's throat tightened. Her eyes went to the window. Beyond the glass, the yard was only dark shapes. She pulled her gaze back to the table, forcing it down. On the road from the grove, she said. Before the market road joins, there's a stretch without houses. Jack's jaw tightened, then loosened. He kept his tone even. Tell me what you saw. Tu Tien's lips parted. She closed them again. Her hand went to her knee, pressing through the fabric. I heard the motor first, she said. Behind me. Jack waited. It slowed down, she continued. Not stopping, just slow, like they were watching. Her shoulders lifted toward her ears. She lowered them with effort. I thought it was someone passing, she said. I moved to the side. The clock marked another second. Jack's fingers flexed once against each other. "And then?" he asked. Tu Tien's voice thinned. The older woman called my name. Jack did not interrupt. He did not ask which name. He already understood. "She sounded normal," Tu Tien said, "like she had met me by chance." The air in the room felt warmer near her face. She wiped her palm on her thigh, leaving a faint, wet mark. "She stepped in front of me," Tu Tien said. She smiled. She asked where I was going. Jack's eyes stayed on her, but soft. He did not push. "What did you say?" he asked. "I said I was going to sell," Tu Tien said. "I did not want to talk." She swallowed. "She moved closer," Tu Tien said. "Too close." Her hand touched the crate strap. Jack's hand tightened on the table edge. He eased it back down. "Then the driver came up," Tu Tien said. "He stopped on the road. He didn't turn the motor off." Her breath broke once, like a caught cough, then continued. "He wore a dark helmet," she said. "I remember his hands. They looked rough." Jack's voice stayed steady. "Did you know him?" "No." "What did he say?" Tu Tien shook her head. "I don't remember words," she said. "I remember his voice, low. He spoke fast." She paused. The clock continued. Jack did not move. Tu Tien's spoon shifted under her fingers and scraped the bowl. The sound was sharp in the quiet. She froze. Jack reached across the table and adjusted the spoon so it rested without touching the rim. He did it without comment, returning the room to quiet. Tu Tien let out a small breath she had been holding. "She told me to hand it over," Tu Tien said. "The older woman. She said it like it was nothing." Jack's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice did not rise. "What did she want?" he asked. "Money," Tu Tien said. "My phone. Everything." She looked down at her hands again, as if checking they were still there. "I said no," she said, barely audible. Jack waited, face still. Tu Tien's fingers pressed into the table edge until the skin blanched. "She grabbed the strap," she said, "and the driver came off the motor. He came behind me." Jack's breath changed. It did not become louder, but it became more controlled. "He pushed me," Tu Tien said. Her eyes shut for a second. When they opened, they looked unfocused. "It was hard," she said. "My knee hit first, then my face. Dirt got into my mouth." Jack's hand moved an inch toward her, then stopped, as if he did not trust himself to touch her without pulling her into something she could not hold. Tu Tien swallowed again. Her shoulders shook once, small. She lifted her glass with both hands and drank. The water steadied her throat, but not the memory. "I tried to sit up," she said, "but I felt a hand on my shoulder, pressing me down." Jack's voice lowered further. "Did they hit you again?" Tu Tien stared at the table surface. "I don't know," she said. "I remember a pain at the back of my head. Then the road went away." Jack stayed silent. His hand settled flat on the table, fingers spread, as if he needed the feel of wood to keep himself present. Tu Tien's words came slower. "I heard the motor again," she said. "Close, then farther." She paused. Her lips trembled, but she kept them firm. "I woke up later," she said. "Not in the yard, not on a road." Jack's voice remained calm. "What do you remember when you woke up?" Tu Tien's face tightened. "Leaves," she said. "The ground was damp. My clothes were dirty. I didn't know which way was which." Jack nodded once. "You didn't see them?" "No," she said. "No people, just the sound of insects, and my own breathing." She rubbed her palms together under the table, the motion quick and raw. "I stood up," she said. "My head hurt. I tried to walk. Every direction looked the same." Jack listened without reacting. He did not offer comfort too early. He let the facts come first. the way a statement would need them. "How long were you there?" he asked. "I don't know," she said. "I lost time." She took another breath. "I walked until my legs shook," she said. "I tried to find a path. Sometimes there was a faint track, then nothing. I didn't see houses. I didn't see fields." Jack's eyes stayed on her mouth, not her bruises, as if listening there would keep him from imagining the rest. "What did you do for water?" he asked. Tu Tien's voice stayed small. "I found a stream," she said. "Not deep. I drank with my hands." She stopped. The clock kept marking seconds. "I was afraid," she said. "Afraid of meeting someone who would send me back there. Afraid of staying lost." Jack's fingers curled once, then opened. He kept his voice steady. "Did you sleep?" "A little," she said. "Not much." She glanced at him for the first time. Only a quick look, then down again. "When it got dark, I sat with my back against a tree," she said. "I tried not to move." Jack nodded. He did not say he understood. He let it be enough that he was there. Tu Tien's hands began to tremble again. She pressed them together hard, knuckles white. "I thought of my house," she said. "I thought I would not find it again." Jack's eyes softened. His voice stayed low. "You did." Tu Tien's lips pressed together. A small sound escaped her throat. Not quite a sob, not quite speech. She swallowed it down. The clock continued. After a few seconds, Jack spoke again. Practical, careful. "Then you met the woman who helped you." Tu Tien blinked, as if grateful to move to a point she could name. "Yes," she said. "After days. I don't know how many." She took another small bite of food, as if forcing herself to stay in her body. "I saw a small house," she said. "Not near a main road. There were plants outside, a basin, a broom leaning by the wall." Jack waited. "I stood at the edge," Tu Tien said. "I didn't want to step in. I didn't want to scare her." "What did you say?" Jack asked. "I asked for water," Tu Tien said. "Just that." She rubbed her thumb along the side of her glass. "She looked at me," Tu Tien said. "She didn't ask who I was right away. She told me to sit." Jack's shoulders lowered a fraction. "She gave me rice," Tu Tien said. "And water. She told me to eat slowly." The clock ticked. Tu Tien's breathing steadied slightly as she spoke about simple things. "She asked where I came from," Tu Tien said. "I told her I got lost. I didn't say more." Jack nodded. "And she let you stay," he said. Tu Tien gave a small nod. She said, "I could sleep on a mat," she said. "She gave me a clean shirt. It was too big." Jack's gaze dropped to Tu Tien's sleeves, as if imagining the borrowed cloth on her thin arms. "What work did you do?" he asked, still gentle. Tu Tien's face tightened with a different feeling now. Not fear, something closer to shame. "I told her I needed to go home," she said. "I had no money. She said I could work and earn it." Jack's voice was quiet. "You didn't have to feel ashamed for that." Tu Tien's eyes flicked up, then away again. "I cleaned," she said. "I carried water. I washed dishes. I pulled weeds from the garden beds." Her fingers mimed the motion of gripping weeds, twisting, pulling. "I helped her sort vegetables," she said. "I swept her floor every morning." Jack listened. The work gave shape to the time she had been missing. It made her survival tangible. "Did she pay you each day?" he asked. "Yes," Tu Tien said. "She said it should be fair. She told me the amount before I started." She paused. Her voice became quieter. "At night, I counted it," she said. "I folded the bills flat and put them under my clothes." Jack nodded once. He could see her hands doing it, aligning edges, pressing corners, making order out of fear. The clock ticked on. Tu Tien swallowed, then continued. "When I had enough," she said, She walked with me to the road. She showed me where to catch a bus. Jack's eyes stayed fixed on her, steady and present. She told me to keep my head down, Tu Tien said, to stay close to other people. She said not to take rides from strangers. Jack's jaw tightened again. He kept his voice low. Did anyone follow you? He asked. No, Tu Tien said. I didn't see anyone. She held the glass with both hands as if it anchored her. I came back, she said. I kept looking behind me, even when I was in the bus. Jack's fingers pressed into the table edge. He released them. His voice remained controlled. Now, he said, the older woman and the driver. Tu Tien's shoulders tightened again. She nodded. It was my former mother-in-law, she said, this time without circling around it. The room went quiet in a way that felt heavier than before. The clock continued, indifferent. Jack's eyes did not widen. His face did not change much, but his hand on the table curled into a fist, slow and deliberate, and then opened again as if he had forced the muscles to obey him. Are you sure? He asked, voice low. Tu Tien looked at him for a second longer than before. Yes, she said. I heard her voice. I saw her face. Jack's breath went in, then out, measured. And the driver, he said. Describe him. Tu Tien stared at the table, searching. Medium build, she said. Not tall. His voice sounded older than mine, maybe around 40. Jack nodded, collecting. Hair? He asked. I didn't see much, she said. The helmet covered it. Any marks? Jack asked. Tu Tien frowned, forcing herself to remember. A scar, she said slowly, on his right hand, near the thumb. Jack's eyes sharpened. He nodded once. The motorbike, he said. Color? Dark, she said. I think black. Plate? He asked. Tu Tien swallowed. Her throat worked as if it was hard to bring the numbers back. I saw only the first part, she said. 2 numbers. Then it moved. Jack did not push for digits she could not give. He only nodded again. What did they take? He asked. Tu Tien counted on her fingers under the table. My money, she said. My phone. The crate. My identification. Jack's shoulders lifted slightly, then settled, as if he was already planning the steps that would come next. Do you still have the clothes you wore that day? He asked. Tu Tien nodded once. They're in the bag, she said. I didn't wash them. Jack's eyes met hers. His voice was firm but quiet. Good. Don't wash them. Don't throw anything away. Tu Tien's lips parted, and then she closed them. She nodded again. Jack leaned back in his chair. He looked at the table for a moment, not at her, as if the wood grain could hold his anger for him. The clock ticked. Tu Tien's hands trembled again. Jack noticed and did not ignore it. He reached across the table, slow, and laid his hand over her fingers. For one breath, she went still, eyes wide. Then her fingers eased under his palm, and her shoulders lowered a fraction. You did not do anything wrong, Jack said. Tu Tien's throat tightened. She did not answer. Her eyes blinked once, then again, fast, holding something back. Jack lifted his hand away gently, as if leaving it there too long might make her feel trapped. He stood up. The chair legs made a quiet scrape on the floor. He picked up his phone from the counter and set it on the table. He opened it and began to type, slow and careful, not looking down for long. He kept glancing up at her, making sure she was still with him. Tell me the day, he said, as close as you can. Tu Tien swallowed. 7 days ago, she said. Maybe 8. Jack typed. The time window, he said. Between late morning and early afternoon, she said, before the market got crowded. Jack typed again. He looked up. Where exactly on that road? He asked. What landmark? Tu Tien stared at the air for a moment, then shook her head. "There's a bend," she said, "a place where the trees lean over. After that, the road is straight." Jack nodded and wrote it down. He set the phone down and reached for her bowl, pushing it slightly closer. "Eat a little more," he said. Tu Tien looked at the bowl. Her stomach clenched. "I can't," she said. "2 bites," Jack said. "Then you can stop." She hesitated, then lifted the spoon. She took 1 bite, then another. Her hand shook, but she did it. Jack watched until she set the spoon down. "Tomorrow," he said quietly, "we go early." Tu Tien's eyes widened a little. "To the police," Jack said. "You tell them what you told me. Only what you remember. Nothing extra." She nodded. Small. Jack's voice stayed calm, but it carried a firmness that did not bend. "They will write it down," he said. "They will file it. They will tell us what evidence they need." Tu Tien stared at her hands. "I don't want trouble," she said. Jack's face tightened, then softened. "This is not you making trouble," he said. "This is you being heard." The clock ticked. Jack reached for the bag by the wall. He brought it to the table and opened it carefully. He did not dig. He lifted each item as if it mattered. He found the clothes she had worn. He did not unfold them fully. He only checked for tears, stains, and the places where dirt had ground in. He put them into a clean plastic bag and sealed it. "We keep this," he said. "We bring it." Tu Tien watched him, eyes hollow with fatigue. Jack took out a notebook and a pen from a drawer. He wrote down the list of what was stolen. He paused, then wrote again, adding a note about the scar on the driver's hand. "Your injuries," he said, looking up. "We should take photos in the morning before they fade." Tu Tien flinched at the idea of being looked at that way, even by a camera. Jack saw it and adjusted immediately. "I can do it quickly," he said. "Only for the report." She nodded, reluctant. Jack's pen moved again. "And we should consider a medical check," he said. "Not because you are weak, because it becomes documentation." Tu Tien's fingers tightened on the edge of her chair. "I'm fine," she said, but the words were thin. Jack did not argue. He only nodded. "We decide in the morning," he said. He closed the notebook, keeping the pen tucked inside. The clock on the wall marked more seconds. The room had the settled feeling of a place that had taken them back in, even if their bodies had not fully believed it yet. Jack collected the dishes without rushing. He carried them to the sink and washed them in quiet, steady motions. The water ran, then stopped. The sound ended cleanly. When he returned to the table, Tu Tien had not moved. Her eyes were on the same spot on the wood, as if staring at it could keep her from slipping back into the forest. Jack stood behind her chair, not touching, just there. "We sleep," he said. "We go early. I will be with you." Tu Tien swallowed. "What if they don't believe me?" she asked. Jack's voice did not rise. "They will take the report," he said. "That's the first step." He waited, then added, quieter. "You don't have to carry this alone tonight." Tu Tien's shoulders lowered slightly. She nodded once, small, as if the motion cost her. Jack turned off one of the overhead lights, leaving enough brightness so the corners stayed clear. He did not leave her in full dark. He walked to the bedroom doorway and paused. "Come when you're ready," he said. Tu Tien sat for another moment, listening to the clock. Her hands rested on the table, still red, still scraped from scrubbing, but they no longer clenched. She stood slowly, testing her bandaged leg. It held. She followed him down the short hallway, each step deliberate, each breath counted. The house around them quiet and steady in a way her body could start to trust. Jack woke before the alarm. The house was quiet. The air held a dampness from the night. He lay still for a few seconds, listening for Tu Tien's breathing. It was there, shallow but steady. He got up without turning on the main light. He moved through the hallway in socks, keeping his steps small. At the sink, he turned the tap on only halfway. Water ran into a cup with a soft, continuous sound. He set the cup on the table and placed another beside it. He washed his hands, dried them, and opened the cupboard. He made something plain, warm, and easy to swallow. He kept it simple and quick. The sound of the tap returned when he rinsed the bowl, then stopped cleanly. He took the notebook from the drawer and set it on the table. The pen rested across the top. He did not write yet. He waited, eyes on the hallway. Tu Tien appeared slowly in the doorway. Her hair was loose and tangled. She held one arm against her stomach, not from pain, from habit. She looked at the table, then at the door, then back to the table again. Jack kept his voice low. Sit. 2 bites. Water. She moved toward the chair and sat. The bandage on her shin peeked from under the fabric. She pressed her foot flat on the floor and kept it still. Jack slid the bowl toward her and put the cup within reach. He watched her hands. They were still red at the knuckles. Tu Tien lifted the spoon and took a small bite. Her throat worked. She took another. She stopped and held the spoon still above the bowl. Jack did not push. He set his own bowl down untouched and pointed his chin toward the cup. Drink, he said. She drank a few sips. The cup clicked softly when she set it down. Jack opened the notebook. Before we leave, he said, I need a few things. Tu Tien's shoulders tightened. He kept his tone even. Photos of the bruises, a list of what was taken. The clothes from that day stay sealed. We bring them. She nodded once, slow. Jack stood and went to the counter. He picked up his phone. He did not raise it right away. He came back to the table and crouched beside her, staying at her level. May I take the photos now? He asked. Tu Tien looked at the phone, then at the floor. Her jaw clenched. She nodded. Small. Jack moved carefully. He lifted the fabric of her pant leg only enough to show the bruises and scrapes. He took a few quick photos. Steady hands, no extra angles. He lowered the fabric back down and set the phone on the table face down. He waited for her breath to settle. She exhaled once, long, and pressed her palms together. Jack opened the notebook and wrote down the list again. His handwriting stayed neat and narrow. Money, he said softly. Phone, identification, crate of fruit. Tu Tien's eyes stayed on the table. And the strap bag, she added. Jack wrote it. He looked up. Anything else? He asked. She shook her head. Jack closed the notebook and slid it toward her. Read it, he said. Tell me if I missed something. Tu Tien glanced down, then nodded again, not reading fully, just confirming the rhythm of it. Jack stood and walked to the bag near the wall. He lifted the sealed plastic bag with the clothes and set it into a larger tote. He added the notebook and pen. He checked the pocket for his wallet and keys. He came back to the table. Can you walk to the car? He asked. Tu Tien tested her leg by pressing her foot harder into the floor. Yes, she said, but her voice carried doubt. Jack nodded. We go slow, he said. If you need to stop, we stop. He watched her take 2 more bites. Then he cleared the bowls without making noise. The tap ran again for a few seconds as he rinsed them. He dried his hands and returned to her side. At the door, he held her jacket open and waited. She slipped her arms into it. He did not tug it into place. He only smoothed the shoulder seam once and let his hand drop. Outside, the air held a thin chill. The yard ground was firm under their feet. Jack walked half a step behind her, ready to catch her if her knee gave out. He kept his hand near her elbow without gripping. The car door opened with a soft thud. Jack settled her into the seat. He adjusted the seatbelt for her so it did not rub her shoulder. He closed the door gently and walked around to his side. When the engine started, the sound filled the small space, then leveled out. Jack did not speak right away. He drove at a steady speed, keeping the road smooth. Tu Tien stared forward. Her hands rested on her lap. Her fingers moved once against each other, then stopped. Jack's voice came quiet, controlled. "At the station, tell it in order," he said. "Only what you remember." She nodded. He kept going. Grove to road, stopped by her, driver behind, shoved, head pain, blackout, woke up lost, then the woman who helped, work for fare, bus home. Tu Tien swallowed. "Yes," she said. The turn signal clicked when Jack made a turn. The sound repeated at a steady pace for a few seconds, then stopped. It was simple and ordinary. It kept the drive grounded. Tu Tien spoke again, low. "The bend," she said, "where the trees lean over." Jack nodded once and reached one hand toward the notebook on the passenger seat. He did not open it while driving. He only touched it, marking the detail. "Anything else about the driver?" he asked. Tu Tien's brow furrowed. "His right hand," she said. "The scar." Jack's jaw tightened once. He relaxed it. "Good," he said. "That matters." They drove in silence again. The road noise stayed even. Jack avoided sudden braking. When they passed a cluster of houses, he slowed without comment. He kept his attention forward. Tu Tien's voice came out thin. "What if she denies it?" she asked. Jack did not answer with certainty he could not give. "They file the report first," he said. "Then they verify." She looked down at her hands. Jack continued. "If they ask you the same question twice, it is normal," he said. "You answer the same way. If you do not know, you say you do not know." Tu Tien nodded. The station building came into view, plain and functional. Jack parked in a spot close to the entrance. He turned off the engine. The sudden quiet pressed in. He looked at Tu Tien. "We sit for a minute," he said. She did not argue. She kept her hands on her lap and breathed. Jack got out first. He walked around and opened her door. He offered his hand, palm up, not pulling. Tu Tien took it and stood. Her knee held, but her body stayed stiff. They walked inside. The air changed. It smelled of paper and disinfectant. A counter stood at the front. A few plastic chairs lined the wall. People sat with their eyes down. The room held quiet voices and restrained movement. Jack went to the counter and spoke with a staff member. He kept his tone polite and direct. He gave their names. He explained the reason for the visit. They were asked to sit and wait. Jack chose 2 chairs slightly apart from the cluster. He guided Tu Tien to the chair closest to the wall and took the seat beside her, angled toward her rather than toward the room. A pen scratched somewhere behind the counter. The sound returned in short bursts, then paused, then returned again. Tu Tien's breathing grew shallow, her eyes fixed on the corridor door that led deeper inside. Jack watched her hands. They were clenched, knuckles pale. He spoke without raising his voice. "Look at me," he said. Tu Tien turned her head a fraction. Her eyes met his for half a second, then dropped. Jack reached out and touched the back of her hand with 2 fingers, light contact. "You are safe with me." The words were quiet. They landed in the space between them without adding pressure. Tu Tien's fingers loosened slightly. Jack removed his hand and stood. He walked to the counter and asked for a cup of water. He returned and set it into Tu Tien's hands. She took it and drank a few sips. The cup steadied her jaw. Her shoulders lowered a fraction. A door opened. A uniformed officer called their names. Jack stood first and held the tote. He waited until Tu Tien was fully upright, then walked beside her into a small office. The room held a desk, 2 chairs, and a filing cabinet. A computer sat on the desk. The officer gestured to the chairs. Jack helped Tu Tien sit, then sat close enough that she could feel his presence without being crowded. The officer introduced himself and asked whether Tu Tien was ready to give a statement. His voice was professional and calm. He looked at her face with attention, not curiosity. Tu Tien nodded once. The officer began with basic information. He asked for her full name, address, and contact number. Jack answered only when asked, and only for his own details. He did not speak over her. When the officer asked what happened, Jack did not prompt. He turned his body slightly toward Tu Tien and stayed still. Tu Tien's voice came out uneven at first. "I was leaving the grove," she said. "Late morning. I was going to the market to sell." The officer typed. The keyboard clicks were light and consistent. Tu Tien continued, one fact at a time. "On the road, an older woman stopped me," she said. "It was my former mother-in-law." Jack kept his face controlled. His hands rested on his thighs. His fingers pressed down once, then released. The officer asked when she recognized her. "When she called my name," Tu Tien said, "when I saw her face." The officer asked what was said. "She asked where I was going," Tu Tien said. "Then she told me to hand it over. Money and phone." The officer asked about the driver. "A motorbike taxi driver," Tu Tien said. "He stopped behind me. He wore a helmet. He had a scar on his right hand near the thumb." Jack watched the officer's eyes lift at the detail, then returned to the screen. The officer asked what happened next. "They pushed me," Tu Tien said. "My knee hit the ground. My face hit the dirt. I tried to get up." Her voice shook. She pressed her palms against her knees, anchoring herself. The officer asked whether she was struck. "I felt pain at the back of my head," she said. "Then I lost awareness." The officer asked what she remembered after. "I woke up in a forest," Tu Tien said. "No road, no houses. I did not know the route." The officer asked how long she was missing. "I am not sure," she said. "Several days." The officer asked what she did to survive. "I found water in a stream," Tu Tien said. "I walked during daylight. At night, I stayed still." Jack kept his gaze on her, steady. He did not rush her. The officer asked about help. "A woman took me in," Tu Tien said. "She fed me. She let me sleep. She offered work so I could earn bus fare." The officer asked what work. "Cleaning," Tu Tien said. "Carrying water, garden work, kitchen prep." The officer asked whether the woman's name was known. "I don't know her name," Tu Tien said. "I did not ask." Jack spoke for the first time in several minutes, careful and brief. "She was afraid," he said. "She kept it simple." The officer nodded and returned to the questions. He asked what property was taken. Jack opened the tote and handed over the notebook with the list. The officer read it and typed it into the report. He asked whether they had any evidence to provide. Jack removed the sealed bag of clothes and placed it on the desk. He did not open it. He pointed out the stains and tears. The officer nodded and noted it. Jack added, still restrained. "I took photos of her injuries this morning," he said, "on my phone." The officer asked whether Jack could send them. Jack said he could bring them later, in a format the station preferred. The officer told him what was acceptable and wrote it down. The officer then explained the next steps, not as a speech, as a list of actions. He said they would file the report and assign it a case number. He said they would verify the identity of the former mother-in-law and locate the driver. He said they would request any available camera footage along the road where it happened, and they would look for potential witnesses who were in the area during the time window. He said it would help to provide any proof of ownership for stolen items, such as receipts, photographs, or messages showing the items belonged to her. He said medical documentation could strengthen the case, especially for the head injury and bruises. Tu Tien listened with her eyes down. Her hands stayed still on her lap. The formal language did not soothe her, but it gave shape to what had been without shape. Jack asked one question, controlled. "How soon will you contact them?" he said. The officer did not promise a date. He explained that they would begin verification immediately and proceed as evidence supported. He said arrests would follow when the case was strong enough. Jack nodded once, accepting the boundary. The officer asked whether Tu Tien feared returning home. Tu Tien's throat tightened. "I feel afraid," she said. The officer told her what to do if she saw the perpetrators again. He told her what number to call. He told her to avoid confronting them directly. His tone stayed calm. Jack listened, then asked about a protective measure. The officer explained what was possible and what required additional review. Jack wrote down the guidance in the notebook without comment. When the statement ended, the officer printed a document. Paper slid through a printer with a soft mechanical sound. He placed the pages on the desk and indicated where Tu Tien should sign. He read a short summary out loud so she could confirm it matched what she said. Tu Tien's hand trembled when she took the pen. Jack did not touch her. He leaned slightly closer so she could feel his presence. She signed slowly, then set the pen down carefully. The officer gave them a copy and explained what to keep and what not to alter. Jack nodded and gathered the items back into the tote. They stood to leave. The officer walked them to the door and said they would be contacted for follow-up. In confirming words, nothing dramatic was offered. The steadiness came from the fact that it was recorded. Outside the office, the waiting area felt loud again, even with quiet voices. Jack guided Tu Tien back toward the exit. He did not hurry her. He watched her steps. In the car, Jack closed the doors and sat behind the wheel, without starting the engine. He set the tote on the floor by his feet. He placed the copy of the report in the glove compartment. He folded the notebook shut and kept it on the center console. Tu Tien stared forward. Jack spoke in the same practical tone he had used since morning. "Next, we get medical documentation," he said. "Then we gather proof for the stolen items. We return what they ask for. We do not do anything else." Tu Tien's eyes moved to him, then away. "I feel tired," she said. Jack nodded. "We go home," he said. "You rest. I handle the rest." He started the engine. The sound returned, steady and controlled. He put the car in gear and pulled out slowly. On the drive back, neither of them spoke much. The road passed under the tires with a consistent hush. Jack kept both hands on the wheel. He watched the mirrors, not from fear, from attention. When they reached the yard, Jack parked and turned off the engine. The quiet came again, fast and complete. He did not rush to open her door. He sat still for a beat and looked at Tu Tien. "We did what we had to do," he said. Tu Tien's shoulders lowered slightly. She did not answer, but her breathing steadied. Jack got out and opened her door. He offered his hand. She took it and stepped down onto the ground, her knee held. They walked toward the house together. Jack carried the tote in one hand and kept the other near her elbow. Inside, he set the tote in a safe place, away from water and heat. He placed the report copy on the table and put the notebook beside it, aligned to the table edge. Tu Tien sat in the chair she had used the night before. Her hands rested on the table. This time, they did not scrub. They did not shake. Jack poured her another cup of water. The tap ran briefly, then stopped. He set the cup in front of her and did not speak. For a while, the room held only small sounds. The cup touching wood, a slow breath, a chair, leg shifting once and settling. Tu Tien lifted the cup and drank. She set it down carefully. Jack stayed across from her, still and present, eyes on her face. The morning moved forward in plain minutes, and the house held them without asking for more.